Hello, folks. It's a little weird to do this without any feedback, but I'm going to hope. Derek, I can see you. Would you put your thumb up if you hear me talking? All right, there's Derek's giving his thumb up, and the two of us should be pinned. And Derek looks much more ready to speak to NFRA than I do, but I got some stuff I have to say first, so I'll let me go first. In fact, I'll unping Derek, not to so Derek isn't awkwardly in front of everybody for too long here, and I'll just put me up, and then I'll come back to Derek. But welcome everyone to the. Marilee forgot to tell me. I have to look at the agenda real fast and tell you what number of the National Forest Service 71st annual conference, which is sort of amazing to think that we've been doing this kind of things for 71 years in partnership with the Forest Service. So it's fabulous. And we still have members here that go all the way back to the founding of NFRA. Now, not directly necessarily with the same person, but the same family. We're in second, third, and fourth generation families, and I think that's one of the great things about this business is that aspect of it, and the fact that that these families have been doing this for multiple generations. The other thing is that about this is the first time probably in history that we've had this conference not face to face, which in some ways is good. It makes it very inexpensive for lots of people to participate. So we'll probably hit our record number of participants today. But the flip side is it also means that we can't get together. And one of the best parts about the NFRA conference is obviously sitting around, and particularly when we sit at the cocktail party the first day and chat and get to know each other again or meet new people. And so I'm sorry that we're not able to do that. Obviously, I think everybody knows why. And so, but it's great that y'all joined us here, and it's great that maybe we can throw our net out to a broader range of people. Particularly, I want to welcome everyone for the Forest Service. I think this is a great opportunity to have more involvement with our Forest Service partners because of late they've had difficult travel and training budgets, and it's much easier just to get onto Zoom. I think we all, if we don't have Zoom fatigue, we all at least know how to get onto Zoom after the last year. And I think most of us hadn't even heard of Zoom until the last year. But we can all share information and meet each other at least this way. And I think that's fabulous. I'm going to give a couple opening remarks. Let me just tell you what the day is going to look like. You're going to have to listen to me for just a few minutes. And then after that is the good part. We're going to have Derek Crandall, who's a counselor to the National Parks Hospitality Association. He's a longtime partner and friend to this organization, and there's very few conferences Derek hasn't spoken at because we always love his insights in the public recreation world. And so we'll have him, and then we're going to talk about some actual insurance related issues and some COVID related issues. We're going to have Steve Williams on at 45 after the hour. He's going to talk about the wildfire insurance issues. If you don't know about them, they've been dire. And then in the next hour, we're going to have Dante Bellino of the same insurance company, one of our vendor members, Interwest, is going to talk about. Dante is a safety advisor there, but counselor, but he is also going to talk to us about some of the new COVID regulations coming out in this sort of second wave of regulations. And then finally, after the break, we'll have a break in a couple hours. And then in the last hour, the third hour, we'll have Jeff Vail from the Forest Service. And I don't know if he's technically Forest Service or on loan somewhere else, but he's really been running the Great American Outdoors team and is taking the lead on the Forest Service side, at least, about how that great act from Congress and the money that's allocated is going to be spent within the Forest Service. And so it's a great day. We've got 4 days all week. It's the same time. It's the same login. So come right back here. Hope to see you all every other day. If you can't be there every day, duck in and out and see what you can. The good news is if you get up and go to the bathroom, you're not going to disturb anybody, so we're not going to know it. And I ask that most of you try to keep yourself on mute. I've allowed you to unmute, but if you have an issue, you can put it down in the chat at the bottom. I see there's already 7 chats, and since I'm talking, I'm not following it. So hopefully Marilee is following it, and just making sure we're still recording. And then you can also, if you don't want to put it in the chat, if it's more private or something like that, you can send an email, and Marilee's monitoring her email. You can send it to info at nfra.org, and she'll get it, and she'll see if she can help you. So welcome. So a couple just thoughts. I mean, it's certainly been, I don't know, maybe every year at the conference, we say this has been one of our toughest years or most fraught years, but I think we can retire that now. I think this is officially going to be the most fraught year we've had in our lifetimes. I hope it is. I hope there's not a weirder one. I think we can start with COVID. It obviously had an enormous impact on this agency and all of our members. We all were pretty much shut down last March, April, May, and we did a lot of work as NFRA with our members to share COVID plans. We all needed COVID operating plans to get up and running with the Forest Service. We shared information back and forth with the Forest Service. They shared guidance with us. And so in true partnership, we were all scrambling around because all these states kept saying, well, go to the CDC guidelines and make your safety plan that way. Well, nobody at the CDC to this day has written a campground set of guidelines. And so we all scrambled around to do that and share a lot of information. I think in that context, NFRA really had a lot of value to folks. It certainly did to me, because all the competitive stuff or whatever went out the window as we were all sort of scrambling to keep our employees and our visitors safe. And through the year, it was kind of a mixed bag. Eventually, when we reopened, some folks, for example, in the campground business, in the overnight family camping business, had really good years and things recovered. In other cases, for example, in the kids camping business, the summer camp business, I know we have, we support something called care camps, where kids come together who have various or being treated for various things to share their experiences, and they camp together. All that got shut down, and so we have a lot of folks that run, summer camps for kids that really are facing financial crisis because their business was shut down for an entire year. I mean, that's not many people that can go and be unemployed for a whole year, especially with a business that still has fixed costs. And so it was a mixed year. I'd say the good news for everyone is, and I don't know if anybody has a countervailing example, but as I talk to look at our company and talk to our peers, I hear very few stories of employees getting sick, at least by exposure in the workplace. That it's turned out that outdoor camping, outdoor hiking, outdoor day use areas, packing, that those tend to have been relatively safe pursuits during COVID, and almost no COVID cases, whenever they've done tracking, have been tracked back to the outdoors or back to the types of outdoor business we run in particular. And I think that's really good news. And so we all need to continue to be careful, and we'll all have to be careful because a lot of states are still mandating a lot of rules. And now that we're in the habit, it's pretty easy to carry on with some of these COVID plans. But I think the good news is we found ourselves in a place that was really a refuge for a lot of the country. In fact, if anything, early in the year, that was our issue with the Forest Service. I remember having a call with Jeff Marcellet when he was filling in for Michigo up in Washington, and I was telling him, Jeff, we've got people, because that was back when everything was closed. I said, we have people breaking in. The public is actually trespassing and breaking down gates and breaking into Forest Service day use areas because they want to be outdoors. And that's sort of good news, bad news. People shouldn't be sort of going to those extremes, but it does mean the public was very passionate. And Jeff Marcellet had said the same thing. He said, I was just going around Virginia to different Forest Service places and looking at places where gates have been broken down and chains have been cut for the exact same purpose. So we did find ourselves as a partnership here with the Forest Service in a place where we were really serving the country. We were giving the country something they needed. And I think that's pretty exciting for all of us. And hopefully for all of our members, that'll translate into a good year business-wise, to the extent that I know several of you had struggles last year, and I hope this year will be better for everyone. The other thing I would talk about, and I'll hand it off to Derek because it's much more interesting than me, but is the fires. You know, we've had a series of bad fire seasons over time. We had a particularly horrible one in California this year. We had I know, for example, some of y'all may know, some of you may not, that my company has merged with California Land Management. And on the California Land Management side of the country, we actually had hosts trapped by fires in lakefront campgrounds and had to be helicoptered out to save them. I mean, we had treasured recreation areas burned down, not only just in the Forest Service, but my friend John Kober just big basin operates in Big Basin Redwoods, and that's just one of the treasured parks in the California State Park System, and that park just burned down. And so, and most of all the public amenities in it, it'll be years before that stuff gets rebuilt. We had similar levels of devastations in parts of the Mount Hood, and Sequoia and Sierra. So as a result of that, not only were we losing, you know, important public recreation options, but at the same time, for those of us trying to sort of recover our business post-COVID, the Forest Service essentially shut down every single Forest Service campground in California for the month of September. And that was on top of the other business things. It was a challenge for a lot of us who were just getting to the point of recovery. And then suddenly, you know, in our case, we had literally hundreds of campgrounds just closed. And then we had them closed for those of us that have stuff open in the winter. I had more campgrounds closed in December by California state order. So it was quite a fraught year. So we're going to talk about over the coming days, and even today, later today, we're going to talk about COVID, if you're not completely tired of it. We're going to talk about the wildfire, because those wildfires had another implication is not only did they shut us down and hurt our business this year, but they have made it almost impossible to obtain wildfire insurance in Forest Service type areas. And so if you're off the grid in the Forest Service and Class 10 protection areas, you know, you can't really get coverage, but our contracts require it. And so what do we do? And so we've done some work on that, and NFRA really spent a lot of time working with that. And I would say Michiko Martin and her staff were fabulous, because we sort of called them in a panic saying, help, and we kept pestering them because we were really worried that we were going to default on our permits. And fortunately, they were very responsive. The Forest Service was a very good partner in that. We worked out some things, and we'll talk about that later today. Anyway, so it's been a fraught year, and hopefully we can all move forward to an interesting one next year. And in that context, there's nobody I can think better to talk about the world in all of its various exciting things going on. And I'm trying to put Derek up and turn on his video again. Give me 1 second. We're all going to, from time to time, Derek just moved in my alphabetical list. So give me 1 second here.
Sorry about that, Warren.
Derek, did you turn on your video? Okay, let me pin you up at the top. Let me find you. I'm going to pin you in a second. When you start talking, I'll pin you up to the top so you stay up with everybody. And but I want to introduce Derek Crandall. And Derek is, you know, I got this long biography for Derek, and it's always very exciting. Derek has been working in the outdoor recreation world since the America the Beautiful, Beautiful Highways, all that kind of stuff way back in the 60s, I think. But really, Derek, if there's anything from the way the current concessions service to the campground, to Floria, to anything that goes on in the public recreation world, you can assume that Derek had a lot of influence in the background just from his passion. He knows everybody in this business, and you can't sit with Derek for more than 5 minutes and say, look, this is obviously how he puts food on the table working in this business, but you can tell that has nothing to do with it. Derek is tremendously passionate about the recreation world. He is retired now from the American Recreation Coalition, which he ran for, I think, 30 plus years, and was always a fabulous partner to the NFRA. He still works with the National Park Service Hospitality Association, and I've run into him from time to time with that group, and they're kind of they're doing a lot of rethinking that group that he's a part of, thinking about campgrounds of the future and recreation of the future. And so I'm excited to hear what Derek has to say. So Derek, I'm going to turn it over to you. And once you get started, I'll pin your video at the top for everybody.
Well, thank you, Warren. You're so
Derek?
kind. Thank you.
You're
Thank
not
you.
here, Derek.
Can you hear me, Warren?
Eek.
Am I coming? Okay,
Derek's
good.
presentation.
Well, it's kind of interesting as Warren.
Right, we're not hearing Derek.
I'm sorry.
This is typical. This is a typical 2000s problem. Derek, you're not
We're
muted.
hearing Derek. It's okay.
Okay, I think Steve's indicating he can hear me. So
Yes.
You're
I'll get
spotlighted
right.
for everyone.
Look
Wait. Derek,
Spotlight.
can you hear me? For some reason, you're on mute or something on your end. Your audio's not working. Can you hear me?
I think we're okay. I'm getting indications from Steve and others that they can hear me. So Warren, maybe to avoid and
Warren, he's good. He's good, Warren.
I got it now.
He's good.
All right.
My audio wasn't working. Okay, we're good. So it's my problem. It's a me problem.
I'm so glad to be with you. And Warren was talking about how long NFRA has been an important forum for talking about recreation issues. I think I've been to almost every one of NFRA's conferences since 1985, the days of the President's Commission on Americans Outdoors. And I always both learn, but also get inspired by the stories that I hear. That's why I'm sorry we can't be together in person, because an awful lot of the storytelling goes on around coffee and sitting, having breakfast with people and others. But we'll get back to that. I couldn't agree more that 2021 is building on the shoulders of a truly unusual year. I mean, 2020 was a game changer in so many respects. And I think we need to look ahead and try to draw some lessons. Personally, this has been a very interesting time. The last time we were together was in Reno in the late fall of 2019. You were my first trip after I got 1.5 pounds of titanium put in my right hip after a couple of years of being almost immobile. And let me tell you, it's made a big difference in my life. Between December 1st of 2019 and 2020, my Fitbit tells me I walked 2,700 miles. That's like 100 marathons. And I can tell you, almost all that was outdoors. It's left me healthy. And it's also allowed me to deal with all of the stress of 2020. I can't imagine where I would have been had I not been able to restore my active lifestyle, enjoying the outdoors and things like that. So really glad to be with you here today. I appreciate all that you're doing every day. And what I'd like to do is just run through a little bit about the lessons learned that from 20. Oops, let's see. Are you going to run it, or shall I share my screen? It looks like Warren, good.
If you want to run it, I'll make you a host and you can run it. It's up to you. Totally up to you, Derek.
It's I probably can click it easier for mine. So if I just
so let me stop sharing, and I will make you co-host, and then you can share. Give me 2 seconds. I just got to find you in the list. Sorry, we should have coordinated this in advance, but I didn't. So you're now a co-host, and you may share.
All right. Am I sharing? Do you see my? Is there a title slide up there?
Did you hit share screen?
I did. So are we not there yet?
Don't seem to be.
Not yet.
So let me do this. And we may have to go back to our original. Are you still seeing me, or do you see my title slide now?
We see you.
Well, Warren, can we go back to plan B, and
can
you cover, and what
I will sit here and just I will forward slide. So I apologize. We didn't practice any of this, all right? So
all right. Well, listen, 2020 was a remarkable year, and I think what we just need to do is remember to look forward and not to. Let's advance the slide once, and just make sure we are looking ahead, not backwards, because there's some really important things to understand. First of all, lifestyle trends in 2020 strongly turned to be in our favor. And I think there are lots of indications out there that there is real potential for sustaining these favorable winds. Next slide. So we competed successfully in 2020 for the first time in years with technology. In fact, technology became our ally with new flexibility in how we work, how we go to school, how we travel. Those have all been really good things. And we also have found that national recognition of outdoor recreation as a positive force has exploded. We are understood much better than we've been for years. So that leaves me very optimistic about the future. Our secret is out. Recreation is good for you and me, for our communities, for the nation, and the world. That's really encouraging. You know, we now have government sanction when we talk about economy being dependent upon outdoor recreation. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, has now come out with 3 different renditions of its outdoor recreation satellite account that measures all of the different components of recreation, from manufacturing to service and more. And it tells us that outdoor recreation is an $800 billion a year portion of the U.S. economy, and that we're bigger than an awful lot of the industries that are frequently talked about as being pillars of the nation's economy. This past year in 2020, where we don't have the ORSA yet out, we've seen a boom in sales of RVs, boats, fishing equipment. Fishing equipment has been remarkable because, in addition to the fact that it shows there's a lot of interest in going out fishing, there is a federal excise tax on fishing equipment. And that federal excise tax has generated tens of millions of new dollars to be able to help people get access to public waters and to get onto the waters with their boats and to otherwise assist the nation's fisheries and recreational boating activities. We also know about how important being outdoors is to our mental and physical well-being. We've long talked about how recreation is the true solution to America's healthcare needs. If we just kept people healthy and didn't wait until we were flat in bed somewhere, if we attacked the kind of illnesses that develop in people who are not physically active and become chronic, we could save billions and trillions of dollars every year. This morning, as I was on my way to something that admittedly was not good for my body, I was over to Panera to grab one of my favorite cinnamon bagels. But I was listening to a podcast by Bobby Bones, the radio DJ, and he was talking about how it used to be that we talked about you needed to take 10,000 steps to be healthy, 10,000 steps every day. And he said the new measure is 2 hours of outdoor activity, being out there in the natural world and benefiting from that. Well, that's so great. We're obviously showing that people are now newly aware of how important outdoor recreation is to our physical and mental health. That means that this new awareness is bringing dividends. One of the benefits that happened last week was a program that really thrived back in the 1990s and the early parts of the 21st century. Once again, was brought to high visibility. Last week, the Secretary of Transportation designated 49 new scenic byways. That's the first time in over 15 years that we've had new scenic byways designated. So the total of all American roads and scenic byways has now neared 200, and we have every indication that the Scenic Byways program is going to once again be thriving across this nation. That's particularly important for this group because the Forest Service has always been a leading champion of scenic byways, and we're excited about what that could mean for both improving the roads, but also gaining recognition for roads that take us into those special places in national forests across this country. but it's not just scenic byways. Today, we have an extraordinary positive movement underway involving campgrounds in national parks. For the last 3 decades, the story for national park campgrounds has largely been about closures due to budgets and no modernization, whether it's bathrooms or showers or even Wi-Fi and others. But the Park Service now has a high priority second century campgrounds initiative underway that focuses on better understanding its current and future visitors. And in addition to going after the hundreds of millions of dollars of deferred maintenance that's developed in the campgrounds, they're looking at modernization. That's really exciting. The deferred maintenance includes the things that you all know very well because they're also in our national forest, but it's campground roads, it's water treatment plants, it's amphitheaters, and more. And it's sorely needed because in the parks, overnight stays are down significantly, more than a third from where they were 30 years ago. And the tab for restoring campgrounds just to their original designs because of deferred maintenance exceeds $400 million. We also expect the Park Service, for the first time ever, to have a new National Park Service campground czar to be an advocate for camping in the national parks. We also wanted to talk a little bit about another positive, and that's the National Park Service concessions policy. We came so close to actually having a final rule, and I'll talk more about what's in the current, now withdrawn, but not discarded. It's just waiting for Biden administration review. We were almost there. For those of you who understand the process that we go through to actually change regulations, this was the first time in 20 years when the Park Service was actually looking at how concessions operate in the national parks and putting together ideas and the framework for a more nimble and better kind of concessions program. And we actually went through a draft in July. We had comments from over 70 organizations and individuals, including U.S. Travel Association, the Passenger Vessel Associations, state park and tourism organizations. The overwhelming support for the improvement and modernization of concessions was heartening. We actually made it to the Federal Register's virtual reading room, which is where all of the proposed regulations and other announcements appear the day before publication on January 19th. Well, we had a very interesting phenomena. We were delayed because January 18th was a federal holiday, as was January 20th. Normally, it would have appeared on the 18th of January, had it not been a holiday, and then published in the January 19th Federal Register. Instead, we appeared in the reading room on the 19th, and then it was scheduled to appear on the 21st of January. However, on the afternoon of January 20th, the new president, Joe Biden, directed that all rulemaking be halted until it could be reviewed by his appointees. And it's very understandable. We frankly didn't expect it to be as sweeping and as broad as it was, but nonetheless, we were caught up in a very awkward situation, and that proposal, again, which has gone through all kinds of extensive public involvement, was withdrawn temporarily until it is reviewed and finally published in the Federal Register, perhaps changed a little bit, but perhaps just as it was proposed. Let me talk a little bit about what it was that this new rule would do. It would end micromanagement of pricing. Right now, we have situations in Yosemite Valley, for example, where the same can of Coke bought from the same vendor sells for 4 different prices because of Park Service regulations, according to whether it is in a restaurant, whether it's at a snack bar, whether it's in a store. And each one of those prices requires the concessioner to go out and find competitive places where that same can of Coke is offered in order to propose to the Park Service a price for that. It will also allow innovation and adoption of contemporary hospitality standards, including new easy rental of recreation equipment. We had a proposal several years ago for Rent My Tent, for example, so that if somebody pulled into a campground in a national park and chose not to bring their own equipment, or because of the cost of shipping it on planes and things like that, just to have the concessionaire actually put the tent up. Well, it didn't work, but the new regulation will allow those kinds of things to happen. The regulation would also call upon the Park Service to invite annually concessioners, gateway communities, companies, individuals to suggest new visitor services at some of the park units, some 330, that now have virtually no concessioner provided visitor services, with new ways to serve their needs. Longer terms for concessions contracts would also be encouraged, whereas the original 20-year ago regulation really put a barrier after 10 years, despite the fact that the legislation encouraged contracts of up to 20 years, where that afforded the public and the agency an advantage. Now that limitation of 10 years would be changed. We also had a very important concept in there that will reward excellence in performance through contract extensions. Every year now, rather than the old pass-fail, the Park Service, at our urging, evaluates concessionaire performance, and we can get superior ratings. And now, if enough superior ratings are earned by the concessionaire, the Park Service has the ability to extend the contract by up to 3 years, which we think is a very important way to both recognize and encourage excellence in businesses like yours. We also would see under the new regulation, new capability, new understanding of the risks taken by business partners. And that would include allowing contract extensions for fires, for government shutdowns, for COVID, and more. That's not allowed under the current Park Service concessions rules. And so we think that's a very important part of that. The regulations would build upon the importance of private investment. Public dollars didn't build the iconic lodges in our parks or the world-class ski areas in our forests and other kinds of great attractions for the public, nor have public dollars been key to sustaining these destinations. So what we have done is work with the Park Service on ways to continue to attract private investment, to expand and to improve the kinds of facilities that visitors will enjoy. And then finally, there is a parallel proposal that will come out, something called VEA, which is the Visitor Experience Improvement Authority, which is in effect a management. So rather than the full concession authority, the Park Service has asked for new capacity to have companies come in and just be managers of recreation facilities. So we're excited about that. And it comes at just the right time. The average National Park Service concessions contract saw a 60% drop in revenue in 2020. And frankly, we're not expecting a return to normal in 2021. One of the things we have to deal with are the changed travel patterns. We don't expect international visitation to be significant in 2021. And in fact, even just long distance travel domestically will be down sharply in 2021. We also have problems that some of you will empathize with. We have major problems housing employees in remote locations under the current public health standards, which in many cases prohibit room sharing of bathrooms, and other kinds of things. And we need to be working with that. The politics of Washington for recreation in 2021 have also seen a sea change. And there is one thing that I think we all have to focus on as being a great opportunity. Those in the middle of our political landscape have more power than they've had in years. So people like in the Senate, Manchin and King and Portman and Romney and more now are very key in a Senate divided 50-50. We're seeing that in the confirmation of the OMB director, a single Democrat moving into the opposition column would kill the chances for the president's nominees for key posts. We're seeing a special role for those states with divided Senate delegations. So Maine, for example, where the chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on National Parks, Mr. King, is joined by a Republican senator, Susan Collins. Those two together have a tremendous ability to influence how the Department of the Interior and the White House deals with natural resource issues in this country, just because of their ability to speak out on behalf of Maine. And it's not just Maine. We're looking at West Virginia, which similarly, Joe Manchin is the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. The other senator, Senator Capito, is the ranking minority on the Environment and Public Works Committee. Again, both committees are essentially even in terms of the numbers of the R's and D's, and it gives, whether it's Maine or West Virginia or other states that are divided like this, tremendous influence over just exactly what moves out of committees and to the floor of the Senate. The House, too, is very interesting because the House is now pretty closely divided, much more closely split than for years. Frankly, a flip of just 5 seats in the House would mean that there'd be a shift in control of the House. And what we have seen over many of your lifetimes is that there are always people on both sides who can be persuaded to vote with the other party on key issues. So whether that's minimum wage or whether that's other kinds of things. Back in the Reagan years, you remember that we had the Blue Dogs, who were Democrats, but who had sympathies for some of what Ronald Reagan was attempting to do. And so that even though the Democrats had numerical majority in the House, the Blue Dog Caucus had tremendous influence over what actually happened in the House of Representatives. Now, we have to step up our advocacy. Even though we are sailing with the wind, we need to make sure that we are up there telling our story and in new ways. We need the voices of our customers. It is not a Washington insider game. We need to use our customers and the power visually of things like TikTok and YouTube and more. We just need to be up to speed in terms of what we do. We also have some themes that will unite us with the Forest Service, with the Park Service, with BLM, with Fish and Wildlife Service, and others. And that includes advocacy for the Great American Outdoors Act. GAOA was a surprise to many of us that it actually overcame the political difficulties of 2020 and was enacted. It is clearly a testimony to some wonderful bipartisan leadership in the House and Senate. It provides $1.5 billion annually over 5 years to help reduce the deferred maintenance backlog. You'll be hearing more about that, but it will aid forest roads, it will replace water systems and more. This is not for new and expanded projects. This is just to attack the deferred maintenance backlog, which for the federal agencies controlled, the federal agencies in total, was between 20 and $40 billion. We don't even know how much it was, but it's a huge figure, and we need to make sure that this money is used well and that we show appreciation for it, because we need to make sure that GAOA lives on after its 5-year current lifestyle. One other issue to be looking at, the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act, which was what happened after fee demo, which starting back in the mid 1990s, we for the first time allowed the Forest Service to keep at least some of the monies associated with recreation in the national forest to meet their operational needs. Well, that is likely to have action in the 117th Congress, which is the 2-year period that started January of this year. Although a full rewrite and improvements in FLORIA may be difficult because of real differences between House and Senate Natural Resource Committee leadership, but be prepared. We, at minimum, need to be partners in extending FLORIA because we're now on a 1-year cycle where we have to actually extend what was passed in 2001. And we need to make sure that we continue to allow the Forest Service to keep its collected fees.
In like 5 minutes, Derek.
Okay. Championing public and private coordination of visitor services, our very heart of our business, is important. And we need to advocate expansions in BLM and reclamation and a variety of other federal agencies. Most importantly, we need to debunk the criticism that we sometimes hear, which is this is privatization. As you know so well, the public and private sectors have been working together for years. And this is not privatization when we act doing things like maintaining and operating campgrounds or ski areas and others. It's a very appropriate way to share our responsibilities. Other special opportunities over the course of the next year, the Recreational Trails Program, which currently provides $85 million a year in assistance to state trail programs, money generated by the gas tax paid on snowmobiles and ATVs and a variety of other off-road motorized recreation activity, but used for all trail interests, including horses and mountain bikes and everything else. That program has the potential through a variety of bills now before the Congress to triple in terms of the money available. And we're also seeing a tremendous opportunity to grow conservation corps. Some of you may know part of my passion now is to chair the Corps Network, which is the national organization of more than 150 conservation corps around the country that allow 25,000 young Americans and young vets every year to serve the nation. We're excited about where that could go. And so that's the end. Let's sail with the wind. There's so much opportunity ahead. We need to put 2020 in the rearview mirror, but learn and take advantage of exactly what it did to help us. So thanks for what you do for Americans every day. I'm excited about continuing our progress. And again, thank you. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Derek. That was fabulous. So I appreciate that. And there are a lot of exciting stuff going on. And we at NFRA try to keep up with this, but Derek has clearly got his fingers on the pulse of all this stuff. And so it's great to hear from you. Their next speaker, we're going to roll right into this. And so obviously, if you need we're going to have a break in about an hour. But if you need to take a break, we're not going to know. You just mute your video, and I guess everybody's mostly muted, and go ahead and duck out and you will be fine. I'm going to make Steve Williams the co-host, and then I'm going to introduce him here. Let me just do a couple of things here so I don't embarrass myself like I did last time. And so Steve Williams is a partner at Interwest Insurance. He's my memory is he's like a third generation insurance guy. I think his grandfather started a firm that is part of the Interwest family now. But Steve is easily the most amazing insurance guy I have ever worked with. And he was brought to me by another member of this agency, by the folks at Basecamp from another trade group I'm in. But I think he represents a huge number of the largest concessionaires in this group, because not because of anything except that they do a fabulous job. And you're going to see two examples of that. You're going to see Steve in a minute, and you're going to see the safety guy that we all know, Dante Bellino, after that. But Steve has been, I just have to give a shout out to him because he has been an incredible, you know, as a vendor partner in this firm, he has been an incredible partner in the NFRA on this insurance issue. Not only, I mean, this was not an issue like, you know, we rolled Steve out in meetings from time to time. Steve took the lead. He, you know, sat down with, he contacted the Forest Service. He talked to them. He tried to explain to them what the market conditions were, because that's one of the difficult things for the Forest Service, and that we have to, the role we have to fulfill as partners is the Forest Service has all these requirements that seem reasonable, like having property insurance, but because they're not purchasing it for themselves, particularly for property insurance, because the government is self-insured in its own assets, so it doesn't really participate in the property insurance market. You know, they don't know, you know, what's going on in that market, and you know, and I think Steve has built up a lot of trust with them, and Steve was essential in working with us in getting some mitigations this year on the property insurance requirements, or at least some considerations of that, working with the Forest Service. And so Steve is going to talk about the state of the insurance market. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay, thank you, Warren. Can you hear me? Is everybody able to hear me? Okay, good morning. So the topic today is going to be wildfire, and it's going to be specific about property insurance and wildfire and how they relate. Just to comment a few moments more on what Warren introduced me as. I thank you for that, Warren, those kind words. Our firm is not an insurance company. Rather, we're an insurance broker, an independent insurance broker, and we represent the concessionaire, the permittee. We represent them in the process of obtaining insurance from a wide variety of insurance companies. So our process is one of negotiation and basically explaining to the insurance companies what it is about the concessionaire permittee that they do, how they do it well, in order to negotiate the most favorable insurance rates they can possibly obtain. And back to wildfire, this is a challenge. I want to give you all just a little bit of history on how bad this wildfire situation has become. In the year 2020, during the peak of the fire season, every 24 hours, an area the size of Washington, D.C. burned. Every 24 hours. Some of these fires swelled to 100,000 acres, which is about 150 square miles, in just the first 12 hours of the fire. These are unprecedented changes in fire behavior. Now, we can look back and see that we've had wildfire for 100 years or 1,000 years. I mean, there's no mystery about the fact that wildfires have always occurred. But in 2020, they were terribly unique in some characteristics. And I'm not going to go into a long story about climate change or man-made climate change or drought or forest management practices or any of that. But what I will say is during today's talk, I'm going to talk about the current insurance crisis, some potential solutions to it, as well as the outlook for 2021. And for those of you that have specific questions, if you could please either email them or put them into the chat section. I won't be able to track your questions while I'm talking, but maybe I'll leave some time at the end to answer questions, and I'll look to Warren to assist me, maybe pick out the common themes or highlighted questions that need to be answered. So is wildfire unique to California? Nope. We had horrific wildfires in many states in 2020. In fact, if you go back to 2013, there was a horrific fire in Arizona that actually killed 13 firefighters or 19 firefighters. It was one of the largest death tolls in firefighting in modern history. But what we're starting to see is that the 15 Western states are at severe risk. The insurance industry has currently focused its wrath, if you will, on California due to the tremendous fire losses that have occurred there. But I'm in regular contact with numbers of insurance companies on a weekly basis, and it's just a matter of time before all of the states in the Western United States are going to be, considered hot, if you will. And I'll give you one example of that. In 2020 in Colorado, there were two fires that were separately burning. They merged together and they were about to destroy a town. And the only thing that saved that town was a snowstorm. Of all things, a massive snowstorm put the fires out. Now that tells you how late in the season fires are burning, tells you, and by the way, the snowstorm froze all the water pipes, which would have made firefighting rather difficult had it come into town. So kind of a chicken or the egg issue there. Let's talk about insuring wildfire exposed areas. A lot of people think that the insurance business is a racket. Some people think insurance companies always just want to collect your premium and not pay their claims. A lot of people have had negative experiences with insurance on their homeowner side or auto side. So people's experiences with insurance vary greatly. But if I'll just take a minute and take you back to the beginning of insurance, if any of you have seen the movie on Lloyd's of London, I mean, basically the idea of insurance started with a group of investors insuring ships that would travel from Europe to the United States and back. And many of those ships successfully made that journey, delivering their cargo and returning to collect more cargo. And some of those ships didn't make it due to storms or piracy or a variety of things. And so insurance people, as they developed, would bet, if you will, on the likelihood of those ships making it. And the more ships that sailed, the more predictable those outcomes became, and the more the premiums became lower because the people that were insuring those journeys had confidence in the data. So that is essentially a real thumbnail sketch of the genesis of insurance. It's all based on data. Well, if you look at the wildfire season dating back to just 2017, in the year 2017, we had some major fires, Napa for one, if you recall that, and there were some others. The loss ratio for the insurance industry on wildfire for the year 2017, and when I say loss ratio, I'm talking about all the premium being collected versus all the claims being paid. The loss ratio was 90% in 2017. So what does that mean? Does that mean the insurance company made a 10% profit? No, it does not, because there's other costs involved. They have to buy reinsurance, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They have to pay for issuance of policies and people to administer claims and overhead and all of the above. So a 90% loss ratio is not a good loss ratio. You would hope your loss ratio to be 50% if possible for an insurance company to be successful, meaning they paid out 50% of all the premiums collected in claims. In 2018, that loss ratio climbed to 110%. In 2019, now what was unique about 2019 from a wildfire year? We had a lot of rain, a lot of moisture. We had a delayed and extended rainy season, and we didn't have hardly any wildfires in 2019. 2019 was a terrific year as far as fire goes. And the insurance industry had loss ratios that varied, but some of them as low as 20%, some 40, 50%. But overall, 2019 was a low loss ratio, very good year. In 2020, the industry loss ratio was 150%. So essentially in three of the past 4 years, we've had extreme unprofitability for insurance companies insuring wildfire. They got lulled to sleep a little bit in 2019 because it was such a good year. And in fact, that partly explained the bad loss ratio in 2020. In retrospect, some have said that the premiums charged for property insurance in 2020 likely should have been much higher. But because they had such a good year in 2019, confidence was built, maybe false confidence, and they ended up keeping the premiums at a reasonable amount. Everything started to change in late 2020. Insurance companies started pulling out, started saying, we don't want to insure California, saying we don't want to insure wildfire. And it was sort of a domino effect that we could see coming. Again, I'm speaking specifically to wildfire, not to other things like how the pandemic affects insurance. So we began the process of looking for alternatives. And in every time there is a crisis in the insurance business, meaning something new, emerging, and not understood. I'll give you an example. Back in the early 80s was when we first started seeing sexual harassment claims. And the insurance industry didn't know what to make of those. And so they just excluded all coverage for lawsuits against employers for sexual harassment. As the data began to accumulate, the insurance industry began to offer insurance for sexual harassment coverage against employers at a high deductible and a high premium. As the data began to generate and become more confident and increase even more, then the insurance industry offered very affordable insurance to employers who did the right thing, who had a good employee handbook, who did the proper training to avoid sexual harassment. And now today, if you're a good employer with a good track record, a good handbook, and good processes in place, you're able to get sexual harassment insurance amongst other coverages rather affordably, because the insurance industry is confident in the data. They're confident in the predictability and the outcomes. And a lot of people are buying the insurance, which spreads the risk out even more. Back to your industry. In the outdoor recreation industry, you already are behind the 8 ball because you're in what's called a fire protection class 10 in most cases, meaning that you've got property located on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest risk, in a city right next door to a fire department versus a 10 miles from a fire station, maybe no fire hydrants, and the response times being difficult or slower, and the risk of a total loss being significantly greater. And so you're already behind the 8 ball there. The issue with fire insurance in the woods has changed. Most insurance companies now are no longer using the fire protection class 1 to 10 to measure the risk. In fact, most insurance companies and the reinsurance companies that back those insurance companies are using a new set of software that's been developed over the last 5 years. One of them is called Touchstone and the other is called Risk Meter. But what they are their brush scoring software. They use a combination of variables to calculate what the risk is of a wildfire and what the risk of a total or catastrophic loss is. There's a lot of flaws in this software. If you use My Home, for example, My Home is in a city limits. It's a fire protection class 3, but I happen to have a homeowners association greenbelt adjacent to me. And that greenbelt is on a hillside. And if it were to catch fire, it looks like it would swell up the hill and destroy my home. Well, in 2018, 19, and 20, the homeowners association worked hard. We all were assessed, and we brought in fire clearance and cleared all the brush and trees and created a much safer zone around the structures. But if you go to Google Earth and you type in my address, you don't see any of that. When you see satellite image on Google Earth, I hope everybody realizes those are not satellite images. In most cases, they're drone images where somebody has paid for drones to fly over your town and take high altitude photographs of the area. Well, there have been no updates to those drone images in many cities and many forests for several years. So all of the mitigation efforts that have been done by many of you, either at your home or in your forest, none of those are actually visible by aerial photography currently. Some of them are, and there have been some updates, but many of them are completely outdated. And so insurance decisions are being based upon a horrible trend in increased fire and bad data. What we now have is an exodus of the market. Insurance industry is notorious when they see a trend in increased risk to run and hide. Insurance companies just non-renew or cancel. Many of you have seen that happen with your homeowners policies. And they go sit on the sidelines until they have more confidence in the data. It's also opportunistic in a bad way. Some insurance companies, like Lloyd's of London, will step in and decide to play in this arena, but they do it at exorbitant rates. They're basically throwing out a huge bet that it isn't going to happen to them. And if they can collect enough money and put a big enough deductible on it, they're willing to take the risk. As the data matures, you'll begin to see other insurance companies opportunistically try to undercut the first entrants. we'll still charge a lot of money, but we'll charge $1 less than the guy that was insuring you yesterday. And so that's the creep that begins. And then as the data matures more and more underwriting characteristics are developed to really understand the difference between a good risk and a bad risk, insurance companies will re-enter the market, spread the risk out, and charge competitive premiums. I mentioned I'm going to talk about the outlook for 2021. That ain't going to happen in 2021. I'm sorry. The insurance industry is still collecting data. They're still scared. They don't have any confidence that we're going to have a repeat of 2019. In fact, they have great fear that we're going to have a repeat of 2020. You know, to kind of put in perspective, Warren mentioned one of the crown jewels of the California State Park system was destroyed by wildfire this year. That's a sort of a coastal area with a lot of humidity, large redwood trees, not something you would have normally expected to be destroyed, but all the structures in Big Basin and Little Basin were destroyed. Current estimates of that loss are $13 million, maybe more, maybe 15 million. I mean, that's a horrific amount of property destruction. And clearly, whatever premium was charged, it would take generations to collect enough premium to calculate that much of a loss. So imagine if you're in the insurance company and you paid out $15 million in one single loss at one single location, and yet you're on thousands of locations in the Western United States. It's going to leave you lacking a great deal of confidence. So what are the solutions? One thing that I've seen in my years in the business, which is 38 years, by the way, is that you will begin to see when a risk becomes almost uninsurable, that a government may step in and offer a solution. Two good examples of that are flood. If you're in a flood zone and you need flood insurance, you currently procure that coverage mostly through the National Flood Association. If you're in an earthquake zone and you have a high risk of earthquake, live on a fault line, you typically now obtain that through a state earthquake authority. Now, those are government solutions. If you look at terrorism, for example, following 9/11, the insurance industry realized that they couldn't shoulder the loss of terrorism on a catastrophic basis. It would bankrupt many insurance companies. And by the way, it did bankrupt at least one. They wanted to exclude terrorism, but they negotiated a treaty with the federal government stating that we will provide terrorism coverage provided that the national government would be the backstop or the reinsurer of record for terrorism. And so now each of you get an opportunity to purchase or decline terrorism coverage that's available only because the federal government has allowed themselves to be the backstop to the insurance industry to make the coverage available. So will that happen for wildfire? Will we begin to see a wildfire pool either on a statewide basis or a federal basis? I don't know. I can tell you it seems like a logical solution. I know that talks are occurring for that. I know that they're occurring in different state venues as well as federal levels, but that isn't going to be put together and come to be in the year 2021, at best, maybe 2022. So when with regards to risk management, most insurance companies say, give us a reason to believe you're a better risk. Show us why we should insure you instead of the other guy. What is it you're doing from a risk management practice that makes you a lower risk, less likely to have a fire loss? Well, that would include things like on your homeowners, clearing brush 150 or 100 feet from your nearest building, pruning all tree limbs that hang over buildings or removing trees that are too close. All of these things happen daily in the insurance world on a private sector basis. And in order to get insurance, you need to demonstrate that you've done significant risk reduction. And if you have, then the insurance companies will often insure you. Well, I would say that seems rather challenging in the forest, whether it's U.S. Forest Service property, National Park Service property, BLM property. I know that you're not able to just go out there and clear trees and everything away from everything 150 feet. I realize all of the complexities, legal and practical, that go with that. But if you think about it from an insurance company standpoint, that's what they want to see in order to re-enter the market. Wildfire is a unpredictable risk as of 2020, or you could say it's predictably high. I don't see the insurance industry softening in their position of that immediately. Time will tell. If we have 2, 3, 4 years in a row like 2019, yep, confidence will build. If we have 2, 3 years in a row like 2020, it will just go away. There will be no coverage for wildfire. At the moment, through a combination of high-risk insurance companies charging exorbitant pricing with very high deductibles, you can structure a wildfire insurance program in some locations currently. It's not a complete void, but it's close to it. But it can be obtained. And I recognize that for this industry, meeting the terms of your contract are going to be difficult, if not impossible. And even if you can obtain the insurance, the premiums could be so significantly high, it would render the contract unprofitable. And so we've been working with Warren, Marilee, and other members of the board of NFRA to address this issue throughout the last year, actually for the last several years. There's many people from the Forest Service on this call today that have worked cooperatively with us. I've done my best and my team has done its best to provide educational tools to help them better understand the environment. And I would suggest that putting the requirement of providing wildfire insurance on the contractee or contractor maybe on pause is a really good idea until the insurance marketplace defines itself, or a government solution for wildfire insurance should come into being, and maybe it will, maybe it won't. I would like to say that it's an easy fix. It's going to happen quickly, but it's not. Recent history tells us it's not. So maybe I'll pause there. Warren, I'll come back to you for a minute and see if you have any specific questions I can address, or if any questions have come in from the group that I can possibly address.
Yeah, I've been very deep in this, so I'm not sure that I have anything. I've been looking to see, I haven't seen anything in the chat. Does anybody want to unmute themselves? I've given you all the ability to unmute yourselves. If you remember, mute yourselves back. If anybody has a question of Steve, otherwise I can talk a little bit more about what the Forest Service has agreed to allow as accommodation, potentially.
Yeah, Warren, why don't you go over that, and we'll see if any additional questions come in. There's more I can talk about. I know. Okay. I think more time is allowed, but yeah.
So let's just quickly say, just to remind everybody, some of y'all should have seen this, but the accommodation, Steve took this whole story to the Forest Service. And again, you got to realize, to be fair to the Forest Service, you know, they asked for what's in the permit for reasons, or you know, or at least it's been there forever, and so they're reluctant to walk away from it, and they just don't have exposure to the insurance market. So stuff we see all the time, they don't. And so Steve really acted as a resource to them, and to their credit, to Georgia and Michigan and all that group, they went beyond that. They actually pinged some other industry sources for information. So they actually did research on the industry to make sure that they understood what was going on. And I think the consistent message they got back from everybody was, it ain't, you know, there really is a problem. There's not going to be reasonably priced property insurance available in these Category 10 Forest Service sort of contexts. And so the accommodation that's been provided is, you may go to your permit authority, and you may, if you have a property insurance requirement from the Forest Service, and you may take that and they are, I don't know what the right word is. They're allowed to, they've been encouraged to, most of them are very accommodating to provide a 6-month sort of waiver on the wildfire insurance requirement. You still need to get property insurance, which you can get to insure against losses by other sources. For example, if one of your employees backs a truck into the bathroom or something and destroys the bathroom building, that's still on you, because that's one of your acts and omissions for which you're liable under the special use permit. But if you bring, and there's actual criteria, and you can check with Mary Lee on them, but I believe if you have like 3 denials from different folks that you've sought bids from, you can take those to whoever your permit authority is, and the authorized officer has the power to give you a letter saying that the requirement is waived. And we actually, our renewal doesn't come up till May. And so we've actually gone to, and this has been communicated to all the field by the Washington office. And so they're generally familiar with it, and we forwarded it as well. But what I did is I took a copy of that and I sent it to all my permit staff, whether it be the forest supervisor, district ranger, or recreation officer, whoever was in charge. We worked with most. And I just sort of warned them. I said, hey, come May, there's a very good chance I will be seeking this accommodation, and be prepared, because come late May, you will be a week away from Memorial Day. So it would be a really bad time for us to have to shut down because we don't have, all the requirements of the permit. And so could you sort of tell me in advance if you're sort of open to providing this accommodation that's been suggested by the Washington office? And pretty much all of them have. And so it's good to have this discussion as early as possible, and that accommodation exists. And what we're going to do 6 months after that, I don't know. We, as Steve says, the insurance market doesn't know, but I know that the Washington office has been open to working with us on that, and so they've been great, and I want to give them the compliment. So from that perspective, if you don't have the details or haven't seen it, I encourage you to talk to your Forest Service people early, and Mary Lee can get you a copy of the accommodation. Now, for those of you in a different situation, I'm going to let Steve speak to this because I don't know. Some of you don't have insurance because it's the Forest Service's property and they're asking you to insure it for them, like we do in the campground world. Some of you have your own property that's in classed areas and you can't afford to have it burned down. And so it's nice in theory that the Forest Service might waive the insurance requirement, but you can't reasonably do that from a personal financial risk perspective. And I have that situation too. We have, a big building and 24 cabins that effectively I own, don't quite own, but it's the funny, whatever ownership is on public lands, but I am responsible for, and I have to insure in Burning Falls. And we're going to have to figure that out. And so I'd say that's the other issue, Steve, is not only that did we get this accommodation, but a lot of folks in our audience are sitting there saying, okay, that's all well and good that you campground guys got an accommodation, but what about me? I've got $1 million invested in my resort and I got to insure that. And what am I going to do?
Yeah. So that's a great segue, Warren. Let me talk about contracts for a minute. For any of you on the call, let me offer this. If you would like our team to look at the insurance requirements within your contract and offer an opinion on them, we're happy to do so. We've looked at hundreds of contracts, and I can tell you that the insurance requirements in each of those contracts are often quite different. The language in the contracts oftentimes is archaic. It was pulled out of a contract maybe generations before. It uses wording that is inconsistent with the way we secure insurance in the marketplace today. To make it really simple, if it's at all possible, there's a difference between property insurance and liability insurance. A lot of times what we see in the language, our interpretation of what's being called for is property damage liability insurance, not property insurance. We believe that the original intent of the contract, the way it's written, is stating that the permittee, concessionaire is required to insure for property damage that they are liable for, such as driving a truck into a building, smoking in a bathroom, whatever, but not for wildfire. And when Joe Mead was involved in the organization, I had a long conversation with him one day, and I said, do you believe that this contract's intent was to transfer the responsibility for wildfire to the concessionaire, or do you believe the language in the contract's intent was to make the concessionaire responsible for any damages they or their employees cause to the property that has been entrusted to them to administer? And he said the latter. And I agree with that. Now, I've seen some contracts that are updated that maybe imply more strongly that the intent was to provide wildfire coverage, but I find that perplexing given that the federal government doesn't insure its own buildings for wildfire, but yet they enter into a concession agreement and all of a sudden they want the concessionaire to insure for wildfire. So I really look at the wording in the contract. I've looked at insurance policies and insurance contract language for many years. And I truly believe that the contract language, and all of you should look very closely at your contracts, does imply that they want you to insure for damages you may cause or for which you are liable. And a reason for that, one crystal clear reason is, let's say you have a statement of buildings or improvements at the location that total $2 million. There's $2 million worth of scheduled buildings there. And in the contract, it says we will require the concessionaire to provide $1 million worth of property damage liability. Well, insurance doesn't work that way. You can't go buy $1 million property policy to cover $2 million worth of buildings, and then after there's a loss, choose where that property insurance is going to be applied. Insurance companies are either going to underwrite all of it or none of it, but they aren't going to sit there and say, here's $1 million bucket of money and you can just use it wherever you want. Insurance was never designed to work that way. And so when they specified, but yet liability insurance was often written that way. So if you look at traditional liability insurance policies, they'll say right within them, we provide $1 million of fire legal liability. What does that mean? It means if you're legally liable for $1 million worth of fire loss, that's for property in your care, custody, and control, we will pay. That's under liability insurance. Under property insurance, when you buy property insurance, it's for all types of risks, negligence, wildfire, and the like. And so I think one of the big issues, if we're looking for potential solutions, is we need to gain absolute clarity in our contracts, all of them. And we need to really be clear in the contract language as to what's required. If it is the agency's intent to require wildfire, it clearly needs to state that. If it's the agency's intent to require them to insure for all types of property loss, say, for example, just a tree falling on a building, and they want you to insure for that, it needs to say that. If they don't mean for you to insure for wildfire or natural causing hazards like a tree falling on a building, rather they only intend for you to be responsible for negligent acts that lead to the destruction of government property, it needs to say that. And I can tell you right now, the contracts do not have clarity in this area. They lack clarity, they lack consistency. I've seen requirements of 100,000 for property damage liability, 500,000, 750,000, $1 million. I've seen all of those in contracts with the U.S. Forest Service. And in none of those examples I just gave was there exactly 100,000 or 500,000 of buildings there to insure. There was always significantly more buildings there to insure. So this is a real inconsistency issue. It's a contract issue. It does fit into the category today of potential solutions. I've had numerous insurance companies tell me that one of the reasons they're not interested in competing to insure all of you folks is they don't like the language in the U.S. Forest Service contract. They feel that it's inconsistent, ambiguous, and leaves them subject to uncertainty. And they've told me that once we gain clarity in those contracts, they may put their foot in the water or in the forest and insure risks in the forest. So I've had that feedback from numerous insurance companies. Pause there. Warren?
Hold on,
I see some questions coming in. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple of folks say one question of the questions was about your use of the word contract. Steve's using contract as a general term for any kind of legal agreement. Obviously, what he's saying applies to the special use permits in the Forest Service and the types of things that we're signing. So that's the one question I saw. And so, Steve, what are our smaller resort permit owners going to be doing? Are they going to be just paying more this year? Is it going to be a scramble? to try to
Yes.
find coverage?
Yeah, I would say if they're a smaller resort owner on public land, they are going to be scrambling. Many programs have been canceled or non-renewed. I know, for example, that a very large national program that insures private campgrounds throughout the United States lost their insurance company. Insurance company is pulling out entirely, and everybody who's a member of that can anticipate being non-renewed and will be scrambling for replacement coverage. The solutions may involve things like, we'll provide property insurance, but you'll have a $100,000 deductible, or we'll provide property insurance, but we'll have a complete wildfire exclusion. I want to make a comment on this notion we've talked about, providing property insurance for all risk versus including coverage for wildfire. Many of the insurance companies are not offering a significant discount if they agree to exclude wildfire. You'd think, well, that's the big risk. They should cut my premium in half or in 2/3 if they're able to exclude wildfire. We're not seeing that. We're seeing the insurance companies offering a modest reduction in the premium to exclude wildfire. But if they have to insure other types of fire, the premium is still going to be high. Why? Well, you still have a typically wood frame building in a forest, remote, that if it did catch on fire, will probably be a total loss. That fire could have occurred due to somebody smoking, could have been an electrical short from an old building that needs rewiring. It could be a lightning strike directly on it or in the vicinity of it. So what they're saying is that while wildfire migrating into the property is a risk and does reflect their biggest concern, the fact that these buildings are wood frame in the forest, far removed from immediate fire protection, also is of a high challenge to them. And they're not offering a huge discount just to exclude wildfire. So I go back to what we talked about a few minutes ago. If we're expecting to insure the buildings for all types of losses, not simply the negligence of the contractor, the permittee, then you're going to face increased costs for a significant period of time. If the contracts were clear that we're only asking you to insure for physical loss to property resulting from your negligent acts, that coverage could be readily available. In fact, I've had many insurance companies speak to me about that and say, if we could get that exact language in the contract, we're in, and we would compete for insuring these operations every day. Because they know you're going to be best practices and you're not going to be doing negligent things to burn it down. You're going to be training your folks to avoid those types of losses and doing good inspections. So to me, that is the best possible solution, maybe not the one the agency's looking for, and I understand their concern for a variety of reasons, but it would be the easiest solution to cause more insurance companies to enter the market.
Steve, this is Marilee.
Yes.
I have a question from someone in the audience. It says, our insurance broker says insurance companies will not insure FS property for us because we don't own it.
I can only say that is not an issue that we've experienced. We often are able to insure properties for people that have leased or occupy them. Just think of the classic landlord-tenant relationship. We often insure the building, but the landlord owns the building, but in their agreement, they require the tenant to insure it. Same with U.S. Forest Service property. We have all of our clients for that matter, who want us to provide coverage on U.S. Forest Service buildings, and we do so when we're able to. So I'm happy to talk offline with that individual if I can be of help.
One thing I was going to point out that we had in our discussion, it was premature because we had to have a near-term solution, but we had an interesting talk with Georgia and Michiko and Steve and Marilee and a couple others, folks like Steve Werner and Eric Mart. And when we were on the phone, one thing that came up is I think the Forest Service, Steve was mentioning this funny situation where the Forest Service is really self-insured. They self-insure those assets. If they're destroyed, a government asset's destroyed, then it's up to Congress or some authority just to appropriate money to replace it. And I think, and so it's funny notion that we tiny little concessionaires are sort of carrying the burden of that. That once there's a concession, that sort of can get around that policy. But I would say one of the interesting discussions was, I think the Forest Service believes in its heart that it would be really, that the Congress may not ever fund replacement of burned down campgrounds, that any campground that burns down is then lost forever to the public. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure it's giving Congress its due. I think public recreation has, you just have to look at what Jeff Vail is going to be talking about later today. The Congress has put a lot of money into the infrastructure of public assets. But that being said, one of the discussions we had is, well, geez, if we didn't just have us concessionaires, but we have all these Forest Service operated properties, maybe even get other recreation agencies, what if we created a surcharge, on these guys, on all this stuff, so on us, on the Forest Service operator, on the Park Service operators, where we collect, let's say 1% of revenues, and 1% of revenues goes, and so the Forest Service gets rid of the insurance requirement. We no longer protect against wildfire. We protect against, property liability. We protect against our acts and omissions as concessionaires. But all as concessionaires, the Forest Service itself, the Park Service, we create a fund, and 1% of revenues from all the campgrounds and public recreation facilities all get put into that fund. And that fund is then a source of replacement dollars when things burn down. And so in some sense, you become self-insured. And I don't know if that would cover it. It probably wouldn't be enough to cover the kind of losses we've had this year, but it would give some comfort that at least something is being done. And I know the public, if you told the public that we're going to charge you an extra $1 at the gate, and that'd be like 5%, but we're going to charge you an extra $1 at the gate for camping, and that's going to go in a fund that will help replace these vital assets if they burn down from all these fires. I don't think the public would even blink at that. So I think some kind of long-term cross-public agency, public-private, includes the concessionaires, includes agency-operated facilities, where there's actually a premium collected as a fixed percentage, and that's all contributed to fund. And I know Steve, what got us started is, Steve, you had mentioned like schools or somebody did that themselves.
Yep.
Right?
So I'll make a quick comment on that. So why do people self-insure? There's two reasons that people self-insure. One is that a group of people have truly proven through data that they're the very top 10% of risk. They're the least risky, and they want to self-insure and create a pool in order to save money and not let the insurance company collect all the profits on their good behavior. The second reason people self-insure is the opposite reason. You're high risk, there's no affordable insurance in the marketplace, and you're facing the need to provide insurance, which is what public schools faced in the early 1990s, late 1980s. And they had to form these self-insurance pools to be able to provide insurance for schools. A lot of court decisions, a lot of losses, there's a lot of reasons for that. And so to this day, there are self-insurance pools that work very, very well. And, they're not just like for bad risks. Once you join the pool, you do have to meet certain standards and criteria of best practices and behavior and risk reduction, but they could be really well performing. And I agree with you, Warren. It seems, it's hard for me to suggest a self-insurance pool for a group of concessionaires because it's not your property, meaning it's the Forest Service's property and you have to abide by their rules. So really, I like your idea better, is that if the Forest Service could help create this pool, that would be a very good thing. And through a mechanism to fund it, that would be a very good thing. I like that solution greatly and think it would be a long-term solution. You're muted, Warren.
The phrase of the year 2020. Judith mentioned that land trusts have done something similar for conservation easement defense funds. So Anyway, I appreciate Steve. If you have any closing comments, or otherwise I'm going to throw it over to Dante because this segment begins in a couple seconds. So I'll let you.
Well,
wrap up.
I'm happy. Okay, I'll just say I'm happy to help anybody that's suffering challenges in this area. I have given the Forest Service my firm commitment to continue to be a resource available to them in learning and educating on this topic and giving them the pulse of the insurance industry. I will help NFRA members and NFRA as an association to try to bring this, problem to a solution. I firmly recognize that the Forest Service wants the insurance in place because of the very reasons that Warren mentioned, but I hope that we all agree that it's going to be some time before the insurance industry as a whole is willing to put their foot back in this pool and play. It's going to be more likely that they continue to withdraw. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Great. So we're going to go straight into Dante. We've got about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have you can obviously take a break anytime you want, but we're going to go straight into, I'm just doing some of the mechanics of pinning and unpinning here. But we're going to go straight into, we're going to have a break, but if you need to leave early, nobody's watching the hallway. But Dante is going to do 30 minutes here. I actually don't know of all of Dante's background. He's actually mysterious about it, which makes him kind of even more interesting. I like to imagine different backgrounds for Dante. But anyway, for the last 10 or 15 years at least, I know he's been doing this kind of insurance safety work with his clients. He does a lot of work in the recreation field. He does a lot of work with us. He's helped us write our safety plans. By the way, this is all just part of Interwest services. They don't charge us. I don't get any consulting fee from these guys. I pay my premiums and they take their piece, and all this is part of their included services. But Dante has been out and visited a bunch of our larger recreation areas and done safety audits. He does this stuff all the time for us. I know he does it for other NFRA members. He's fabulous. He's also a lot of fun to be stuck in a whiskey bar with in Estes Park. And so that's good too. And anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Dante because Dante has been doing a lot of research on OSHA and COVID rules, particularly I know in California, where a lot of our members are. Cal OSHA has, and the legislature have passed a lot of COVID rules that aren't going to go away anytime soon. And Dante has been doing some research on that. He's going to talk to us, I think, on that. So Dante, I'm going to turn to you.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for those kind words there, Warren. It's good to be here. Well, what I will talk about a little bit is all of the activity, especially recent activity around all of the compliance enforcement agencies such as FedOSHA, Cal OSHA, and CDC has been pulled into this. And as well, I've got a recent letter from the U.S. Forest Service on how they're going to implement President Biden's new face mask rule. So we'll kind of go through some of this stuff. And then I would like to extend an invitation. If anybody would like these links of these different things I'm going to talk about, I will then send them to, I guess, Marilee or Warren, and you guys can send them out to the members. I think it's useful information for all of you to have if you don't have enough COVID information at your fingertips. I will say this, that recently, as recent as February 11th, 2021 has been the most recent update, but we have been having updates January 29th, January 1st, the Cal OSHA new emergency COVID regulation went into effect. And it has some impact, but a lot of these regulations are an extension of what we were doing in 2020. There is some new stuff, but it's not, it shouldn't be anything too shocking to anybody. And then I'll talk about some of the stuff as I see as silver lining opportunities to try and get the guests coming into the parks to comply. And we'll talk about that. First of all, I want to talk about the Cal OSHA regulation, the new emergency regulation, had primarily 11 new bullet points. And I want to contrast that to the FedOSHA updated regulation, which had 16 updated bullets. And the Fed OSHA regulation was updated and signed into effect January 29th, 2021. So they're very similar, and it really talks about a lot about how we're to handle COVID on site, and mitigation of COVID, reduction of hazards. So the very first thing with Cal OSHA we should talk about is the very first bullet is the employer is required to have a system for communicating information to employees about COVID-19 prevention. And of course, you know, I mean, that is everything we've been doing, right? It's the social distancing, it's the sanitizing of anything, any surface that people touch and come in contact with. It's making sure people are wearing face coverings. So all of that stuff. And then you have to have policies in place and procedures of how you're going to accommodate this in the workplace. And the most important part, especially in California, is you must present it in a way that the employees understand there should be no fear of reprisal. That's a key element of that whole thing. And then number two is the identification and evaluation of COVID-19 hazards. I mean, what is the most likely hazard place? So we know, breathing other people's air, getting within breaking that social distance barrier, those are problems. When to wear mask and when to unmask the employees. And this is something that I thought was a little bit of a problem last season when I'd go around. I mean, people would take off their masks as soon as they walked outside, and they seem to circumvent that 6-foot rule sometimes here and there. I think we just need to be better at that whole process and evaluating that process. And then investigating and responding to COVID cases in the workplace. This has been a big one because to do it accurately, it really comes down to tracking where your employee was, how he most likely contracted the COVID, and then all the steps you have to take to protect your other employees and employees who've been subsequently in contact with that person, and what are the testing requirements and training and instruction. So this is an important point, as all compliance regulatory agencies that have a training component written into it, is basically it's the documentation. If you don't have documentation that you've trained your staff on the who, what, when, why, where, and the date of the training, it basically didn't happen. And that is true also if you were to undergo a federal audit through OSHA enforcement as well as Cal OSHA. So if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And it does become a bit of a defense article if you end up having to go to an appeal hearing for an administrative judge for an OSHA fine. And then they get into the physical distancing. We know what that is. That's the 6-foot distancing thing. When you're not quite able to do the 6-foot distancing thing, let's say person drives up to a kiosk and they're checking in at the campground and there's less than 6 feet between that, then you need to have a piece of plexiglass there. So, you know, something to separate, a barrier to separate that is very useful. Other engineering controls and administrative controls, in other words, basically your policies, procedures, and how you're going to go about protecting equipment and sanitizing the equipment that is shared by employees. I know we advocate don't share any equipment or tools, but most likely we have to share it at some point, some of it, and that should be sanitized and cleaned on a regular basis, and especially before it changes hands. Reporting and record keeping, and then access to that record to any employee or their representative, basically their attorney, who requests that documentation. exclusion of employees with COVID from the workplace, and then the return to work criteria. What is that? And that's pretty much it for Cal OSHA. And that's 11 bullet points that I thought were, that are pretty well essential. None of it is really new. One of the big problems with Cal OSHA, in the writing of the emergency regulation, they had some phrasing in there that really was misinterpreted by a lot of people. And I'll put myself in that category, because they insinuated that they wanted employers to evaluate guests and customers, vendors, when they were entering buildings, parks, lodges, and that kind of thing. And so that created a lot of consternation in the industry. And so me and a few of my colleagues, we wrote letters to the leaders at Cal OSHA, and we were trying to get an interpretation. It took quite some time, but we finally got the word from them. And really, this is the most important thing. Cal OSHA has zero authority on your customers and people coming in the door, right? It's you are responsible under Cal OSHA, and Cal OSHA is responsible only for the health, welfare, and safety of employees. Now, and that's very positive, because some of the wording was how you have to evaluate your customers and vendors coming into the buildings and campsites and stuff like that. That could be really problematic because it's labor intensive and no one would ever get through the gate at that point, right? So what the better method was, what we instituted last year, was good signage, proper signage all the time, very in a conspicuous location that the customers could read. What are the prevention guidelines, things to look out for, how to report symptoms and things like that if they become ill while they're in the middle of their stay, those common things that we would want them to let us know about, right? And then the other thing is the masking. And this kind of rolls into, I'm going to get off topic here and get into the U.S. Forest Service, because I did receive a letter or an article from the leadership group of the U.S. Forest Service that says how they're going to enforce the face covering protocol that President Biden signed, the executive order requiring face coverings in all buildings, federal buildings and federal lands. And so in fact, they are requiring guests into the parks to wear that face covering. So, and that's not much different than California. California is recommending that. All employees are required to do it. And it is highly recommended that all customers coming in do it. And there's good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. I think that's part of the silver lining. I think if we look at it correctly, we can continue to capture this. I mean, people want to be in the outdoors, as binding as all of these restrictions seem to be on us. It seems as though most of the campsites and hiking and things that I've been doing myself, I think people are complying at a very positive rate. And I think that in itself is a very positive thing. And we just need to be positive about how we do it. Help us keep our parks open is a real common statement by wearing a face mask. It's not about protecting you, it's about protecting others and the parks, right? I mean, however we want to word it, we can get creative. I think that does a long ways in calming down tempers. So I think that's critical. The other thing I will tell you is that a lot of Fed OSHA and Cal OSHA has deferred a lot of the interpretation of a lot of this stuff whenever the opportunity arises to Center for Disease Control or your local county public health office. I would say the primary thing for all of your camp or your locations would be to know the number of that local county public health office and ask how they're interpreting or what are their guidelines for specifically dealing with prevention of COVID and the spread of COVID. Because they oftentimes will then say, well, we're just using CDC guidelines. Remember, the CDC guidelines have just been updated again as of February 11th, 2021. And there's a very good document known as the General Business Frequently Asked Questions document. And I'll be glad to send that link. I was going through it the other day, and it covers an enormous amount of ground in a short period of time. So I think they do a really good job. They did a great job of updating a lot of the questions on that. And the very first one is a very difficult one for a lot of employers to deal with. And it's basically, how do I deal with suspected or confirmed cases of COVID in my workplace? And then it goes through how to handle the employees with symptoms. What should I, tells you how you should be handling it, what you should be doing. Now, all of that, remember, this is through CDC. Then if you have a public health official, for example, the Los Angeles County Public Health Department has stricter guidelines than the CDC. So they've really come down hard with additional requirements that they want. So my number one recommendation is, before your season opens, you're going to have who the emergency responder is, and then you should have that public health official phone number and contact person that you can call before you open up to help make sure you get all the ingredients to your proactive safety plans before the season kicks off. I think that's going to be essential. And then the CDC goes all through the cleaning, disinfecting. What are those procedures? The best way to go about that? What is the definition of a healthy business operation with regards to their definition? Reducing the spread of COVID in the workplace, critical infrastructure. Now, this all sounds similar, and it is true as I'm reading through Cal OSHA, Fed OSHA, and Center for Disease Control. All of it is part and parcel of pretty much the same information, but you're getting a little more detail of the nuts and bolts on it, really, from Center for Disease Control, especially this latest update. And then I wanted to get back to this letter from the leadership corner at the U.S. Forest Service. And basically, it says, to reiterate, all guests will be required to wear face masks when entering a building or the property. So again, I think the fear for a lot of concessionaires out there is, I don't want my employees to be policemen, right? And that kind of thing. And that's why I think we have an opportunity now to create some very positive messaging in trying to get them to do it without having to police your guests and vendors coming in. So I know that's probably might be a little wishful thinking, but I think it can be done. And I think we had some success with it last year. We did also, because of last year at the beginning, we had a lot of problems with angry customers. So it seemed the hostility and everything, everyone was on edge. And so we came up with some simple trainings that would help people through that. Now I want to talk a little bit about preparing. Well, how's OSHA or Cal OSHA, Fed OSHA, how are they going to enforce this process? Well, we have some recent evidence on that, and it's basically going to be through each case. So if somebody, let's say an employee, becomes ill with COVID, and then they go home and they're having a tough time recuperating, and their family member decides, this is ridiculous. They got this in the workplace. They put us all at jeopardy, and they call and file a complaint with Cal OSHA enforcement. That is going to trigger a potential inspection. And that is when you're going to be required to produce the training records, all of the things you do to prevent this kind of stuff. And it'll be enforced through audit, basically, is how it's going to happen. And that's going to be both Fed OSHA and Cal OSHA. Fed OSHA, by the way, does more inspections than Cal OSHA. So Cal OSHA has a little different criteria, but they still get out and about. And the number one way both enforcement compliance agencies respond, the number one reason they respond is employee complaint. And so we want to make sure that the training records and everything is all put together and in place. And for that, Warren, I'm just wondering, maybe we could open it up to a few questions. And if I could answer those questions, that'd be great. If you want me to cover any other topics, that would be great too. So what do you think?
I think that was good. I do think we are, a couple of thoughts about what you just said is I think giving employees a very clear internal mechanism to express their concerns is good, because they usually will use those. Not all of them, some of them won't, just will run straight to the government. But usually most employees will use the internal mechanisms if they're uncomfortable with, how their boss is not wearing his mask or whatever. And so giving your employees those mechanisms to express their concerns or to have input into COVID plans is, I think, useful to avoid problems. I think sorry, one second. I got four things going on. I think the other thing is sorry, I have somebody texting me a question from the background here. I think the other is the issue about trying to police customers is a huge one for us. We have, our customer, between the two sides of our company, we had almost 10 million visitors last year. And I think everybody knows that the visitor issues are fraught with problems. Half the visitors wanted to beat up my camp hosts because they were being too tough about masks. And half the visitors wanted to beat up the camp hosts because, they didn't clean the bathroom every 39 seconds. And so it's a very hard environment when the customer base is split almost 50-50, and none of them sits in the middle of sort of a moderate, reasonable sort of application of the rules. So that'll be interesting, particularly since last year, I think in a lot of places, one of the hard things for us as concessionaires was, and not just on this issue, but on a million issues, is just like everybody else in the workplace, the Forest Service law enforcement was affected. It just was very difficult. A lot of them were not out there for a variety, for their own safety and for their organization's safety and the public safety, or for whatever reason, Forest Service law enforcement last year, it was one of the more difficult years of handling customers, combined with the fact that in a lot of places, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, Forest Service law enforcement was just not available, nor were the local sheriffs. We had one place in the South that the local sheriff said, "Hey, we're not going to come enforce COVID rules. We don't believe it, ourselves. So, we're not going to do that." So it was hard. So I think the key for everyone is you need something in writing that you can wait. You need to have a reasonable solution, the first thing, to keep your people safe. But beyond that, just that is not enough. You've got to put it on paper so that you can waive it at OSHA. And if you have multiple locations, the locations should have copies, so that if somebody shows up there, they can waive, we got a COVID plan and we're following it. Yeah, I think that's more important than anything, than anything out there.
Dante, this is Marilee. A couple things.
Yeah.
If you can send me a copy of that letter, then I'll go ahead and shoot it out to people.
Sure.
That would be great.
Okay.
And then the second question that came up is, what is the duration of Biden's mandate for masks on federal land? Is there an expiration?
Aha, let's find out. Well, in this letter that they sent, the leadership from U.S. Forest Service sent out, it does not have an end date, but you know, it may be up to. No, I don't know. It doesn't say. It just says it just the start of the enforcement date, and then that's it. It doesn't show an end date. I could research that a little bit. If I find it before I send you this link, I'll let you know.
I thought it was like a round number, like either 90 or 120 days. I can't remember which, but I think it was like 90 or 120 days. But I do think it will be extended. I mean, I think Biden ran for office. A lot of his run for office is that the previous president was insufficiently focused on COVID or was insufficiently active on COVID. And so, but I actually think that the degrees of freedom that the administration has to do something about COVID are actually relatively limited in a federal system. And so I think they're going to be looking for ways to demonstrate that they care and they're showing due diligence and concern. And I think that kind of mass mandate on public lands is an easy and cheap way to demonstrate, oh yes, look, we're doing something that the Trump administration did not. So I would expect it to last probably longer than the disease. I mean, honestly, that may be overly cynical, but I mean, I think the administration is scrambling to look for ways to differentiate itself, and I think that's an easy way to do it. And I think it'll be with us for a while. But the original order was 90 or 120 days. I can't remember.
Okay. Yeah.
Dante, one more question. We're supposed to ask you about Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
That came from your boss, no, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for that, Steve. No, I just did some safety consulting and pyrotechnic stuff when they were getting ready to do that work at DreamWorks. So it was quite interesting, and the way they evaluate safety and loss, that's for sure. But that's a whole different workshop.
That wasn't the movie they had the helicopter crash on, was it?
No.
I guess there weren't a lot of helicopters in Saving Private Ryan.
They blew up a lot of stuff, though, I'll tell you that.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's it. And okay, so if anyone's got any more questions, you know, I think, Marilee, you have my email address. So if people wanted to email me directly for information and templates or any type of stuff, I'd be glad to respond to all that stuff too.
I will put it on the chat right now, and then I'll also send it out with notes.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That was terrific.
Okay, cool.
Guys, we're going to have a 10-minute break. So it is right on the hour. We are, for the first time in the history of any NFRA conference, exactly on time. And so we're going to have a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 12:10 my time, and that'll be whatever time for y'all, 10 after the hour. Hello, everyone. This is Warren again. We're in our last segment of the day. We got Jeff Vail. Jeff is, actually didn't look at your actual title. Well, right now I know what he's doing. Jeff is leading the effort, whatever the title may be, and I apologize for not having the exact words, but he is leading the effort in the Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Forest Service to implement the Great America Outdoors Act. And as y'all know, that was an act originally crafted to catch up on deferred maintenance in the National Park Service, but a number of folks, including ORR, NFRA, and of course the Forest Service itself, though it's not always allowed to really lobby, but I know that NFRA was vocal in sort of saying, hey guys, you know, there's a, you know, the Park Service may get all the attention, but I mean, you know, the Forest Service has a lot more recreation areas, and we have a lot of needs here, and got them added. And so part of that effort then is there's now money with rules on it, which I'm sure Jeff will explain, and we want to make sure that we use that as well as possible for the public. And so that's his responsibility, at least taking the lead on that and coordinating the efforts of the whole system to do that. Jeff is something I did actually realize he was actually began as an attorney in the Department of Agriculture. Didn't realize that, and then has had all kinds of jobs, including line manager jobs at Forest Service, and I think he was forest supervisor in the Angeles, and then had a number of other positions, and has worked in recreation with us for on and off for many years. So we've known Jeff as an organization for years, and he's been in the Washington office in the Recreation Heritage Volunteer, I left something out, organization there. And so we're very happy to have him. And so this is the last, he's going to take us to the finish line today, and going to talk about exciting. I mean, I think it's great. There's nothing more exciting than listening to, money flowing to public recreation, which is all of our lives, whether we're public or private side of this partnership. And so this is all great news, and we're all thrilled to hear how this is happening. And you're probably like one of those rich uncles now that always said that, a millionaire has like 1,000 relatives sort of pop out of the barn after the inheritance. So Jeff has got the inheritance in hand, and I'm sure everybody showing up wants to be his friend now, but he's going to tell us, how they're going about that task. Jeff?
Hey, Warren, thanks very much. Just wanted to do a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you quite well.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for the introduction, Warren, and thank you to Marilee and to everybody on the call today for the opportunity to connect with you. As Warren indicated, since the Great American Outdoors Act was signed into law in August of last year, we have been busy preparing project proposals, putting in place a process for selecting and prioritizing projects, working with the department, with the Office of Management and Budget, with Congress, and with the general public to identify how we should best target our investments to address a significant deferred maintenance backlog that has built up over many, many years. And yes, I do want to extend thanks to NFRA and to the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable. Both played an important role in including the Forest Service, as Warren indicated, in this bill, while the Park Service has received the greatest attention for their deferred maintenance backlog. As Warren notes, ours is considerable, and so this funding is badly needed. Warren, we could go ahead and go right into the PowerPoint if you have that up. Great, thank you. So what I thought might be useful is to provide some context for the Act, for the approach that we're taking to implementing it, some of the process that we employed for fiscal year 21, some of the work that we've already done for FY22 projects, and a little look into the future as to what's ahead with the new administration and from what we've learned in the last 6 months. And definitely want to spend some time with you talking about how you can get involved, how you can participate and help us be successful together. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, my intent is to cover some of the key aspects of the Great American Outdoors Act, talk about some of the guiding principles that the chief and the previous secretary outlined for us in implementing the authority, talking about the project selection process and outcomes, and then again, getting into ways to collaborate and work together. Next slide. Great. So at the outset, I just wanted for everybody's awareness to know there are two parts to the Great American Outdoors Act. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, which has existed since the 1960s, has been funded to acquire lands and interest in land within existing public federal land, but also has been a key authority for protecting through conservation easements, primarily working forest and rangeland. And so for many years, there's been a push to fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and this authority does just that. So the program is to be permanently funded at $900 million annually, and each year Congress decides how best to allocate those funds amongst the different agencies within Interior and Agriculture. So the whole process for funding projects, for selecting projects, is separate and apart from today's discussion. The other part, and sure, go ahead to the next slide, Warren. The part that we're talking about today is the Public Lands Restoration Legacy Fund, which is really all about deferred maintenance reduction. And so just briefly, for the Forest Service, we as an agency have a deferred maintenance backlog of just under $6 billion. It's difficult, as many of you may know from firsthand experience, to manage these resources to provide a quality visitor experience when your infrastructure is worn down, in disrepair. And so what we're anticipating, based on the fund source, which is annual energy, particularly oil and gas receipts, we're anticipating $285 million annually for 5 years to target our deferred maintenance backlog. The Act limits the amount of funding that can go to transportation projects, roads, bridges, but not trails. Trails are considered non-transportation assets. It caps the amount you can spend on transportation projects at 35%. So the majority of these funds will target recreation sites, visitor centers, trails, some other infrastructure listed on the slide. Importantly, these are no-year funds, meaning they don't expire at the end of a fiscal year. They remain available until expended. And so that's a recognition that the process for obligating and contracting and implementing, given the budget cycle we operate under, takes some time. Next slide, Warren. I should just pause at the outset and say the reason I'm in this director or program lead for GAOA role is that right at the outset, agency leadership decided to target a certain amount of funding from GAOA toward establishing an implementation team. So I, along with 7 other subject matter experts, are really leading the agency effort toward implementing GAOA. And the idea is to learn some of the lessons from the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act from 10 years ago, and how important it is to get off on the right foot, to invest up front in program management, oversight, and coordination. So I'm joined by several folks who have stepped up within the agency to be part of this effort. So here on the screen, you see once the act was signed into law, Chief Christensen provided some initial guidance, which has continued to guide us to this day. Her emphasis was that we have a transparent and accountable process that internally and externally is understood and accessible, that we apply a shared stewardship framework in how we implement this authority, and that we strive to equitably distribute these funds. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and looks like. Some of the measures of success for us are that we've made some important investments in economic development, particularly in rural areas, that we've significantly reduced our deferred maintenance backlog, that we're benefiting active management in all ways that occurs within the national forests, that we're improving the quality of the visitor experience, and that we're improving access overall for the public. Next slide. So with respect to improving the visitor experience, we see a number of ways in which that can occur and in which we need to stay focused. How we connect people to the outdoors through improvements to recreational site amenities, improvements in how we tell the story of the heritage, cultural and natural heritage, looking at ways to improve existing visitor experience in all ways, providing some investment toward interpretation and education, addressing public health and safety issues associated with our infrastructure, investing in improved accessibility, which is specifically called out in the Act, and also particular to the new administration, targeting investments to address underserved communities in and around the national forests. Next slide, please. So I want to just call attention to one aspect as well of what we're prioritizing. That is projects that can have multiple benefits for forest management. We, for example, have a deferred maintenance backlog with our roads of in excess of $3 billion. Many roads are critical, and bridges as well, in needing to be upgraded in order to conduct vegetation management, to do fuels reduction, to fight wildfire. And so it's a key component or piece of this. I know that much of the focus of the Act in terms of the motivation for it was around improving recreation and visitor experience. And that remains the case, but we are factoring in ways to also improve how we manage infrastructure that can contribute to our multiple use mission. Warren, let's go to the next slide.
One second, we seem to have some kind of failure. There we go.
Great, thank you. In terms of our process, what I wanted everybody to be aware of is that at a regional level, at the forest level, there was a big push that we wanted to acknowledge to put a certain percentage of these funds toward projects that traditionally may not have ranked out highly in our capital improvement program, that have often been overlooked, but that at a local level are of particular importance. And so in that spirit, we dedicated 40% of fiscal year 21 funds toward regional priorities. The review process still occurred for the regional projects, but as long as they addressed and reduced deferred maintenance backlog and otherwise were consistent with the Act and the sideboards that I mentioned earlier, then they were approved for funding. The remaining 60% of funds involved a national competition where our 9 regions, as well as our research stations, submitted projects that they had prioritized, and then a screening process was conducted. And out of that came one complete list that was briefed through the chief and the secretary on through Office of Management and Budget and submitted to Congress at the beginning of November. The Act required us to develop our fiscal year 21 project list within 90 days of the Act signing, which required us to work very quickly with Forest and with external partners to get our priority list of projects together by November 2nd. Warren, we can go to the next slide. So I hesitated to put this in, but I wanted people to have an appreciation for the larger context. We've been managing our capital assets and our infrastructure since the beginning of the Forest Service over 100 years ago. What we recognize is there are multiple funding streams for managing our assets and our infrastructure. The Great American Outdoors Act represents the largest and is a huge influx of funds badly needed, but there are funds also available through the Capital Improvement Program, through the Federal Lands Transportation Program with Federal Highway Administration, and funding for decommissioning facilities on the national forests. So collectively, under the oversight of senior management in the agency who comprises the Asset Management Review Board, in fiscal year 22 and going forward, as opposed to how we rapidly implemented fiscal year 21, we are looking at all of the different funding streams that you see on the screen, not just Great American Outdoors Act, and setting priorities for investment that draw from all of those funding sources. I just would note as well that the model for fiscal year 22 and for 23 identifies 6 different benefit areas with different criteria under each that collectively shape how we go about prioritizing and selecting projects. So we saw a shift in the process between 21 and 22, and a lot of that was just to consolidate under one process and one organization how we manage and prioritize our infrastructure improvements. We can go to the next slide. So here you see a breakout of the funding by different asset types for fiscal year 21. And note that the projects submitted for fiscal year 21 to Congress have been identified, have been approved for funding in the annual appropriation for the Forest Service. That appropriation funds 556 projects on the national forests in 41 states and in every region of the agency. And you see that the great majority of projects are recreation site in nature, but we do have a significant investment in roads and bridges as well. And of course, investments in trails and trail bridges are themselves investment in recreation. So I would foresee that we're going to continue to see an emphasis on recreation, probably even more so as the new administration gets established and provides its policy expectations. And just for a note, there are more than 556 projects if you add up the total in the project column. And that's because many projects benefit multiple asset types. So in counting projects, we broke that out. If a project benefited a trail and a trail bridge and a visitor center, then we would count that under each of the asset categories. Warren, we can go to the next slide. So here's perhaps the most important part of today's conversation. What are we doing to engage with you and others to be a part of this effort? How can you be involved at all levels of the agency? Secretary Perdue and the chief expected us to engage with the public regarding our projects for fiscal year 21 and 22. And admittedly, we simply didn't have the time, ideally, to do justice to that. We did publish through the region's priority list of projects that had been proposed for funding for a 10-day comment period for fiscal year 21 and for 22. And we received close to 500 unique comments on our fiscal year 21 projects and more than 1,000 comments on our 22 process. 10 days is not enough time, and we recognize that, but the time crunch under the act was such that we didn't really have much flexibility. We also did host, and I know Marilee participated in some roundtable discussions, some listening sessions hosted by our Deputy Chief, Chris French. We hosted 5 of those throughout the fall, and those were helpful to talk at a big picture level as to what our priorities ought to be, what our process ought to look like, what success ought to look like. So going forward, we are planning to work with some of our partners like the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable and the National Forest Foundation for more in-depth partner and stakeholder engagements this spring. And that will help inform our process for fiscal year 23. So we're looking forward to getting those scheduled in the next several weeks. And Marilee, you and others certainly will be involved and invited to be part of that. At the same time, we are expecting our forests and our regions to conduct more local level engagements that are specific to what projects are our highest priority at a local and regional level. And so I would encourage you and your membership to be ready to join into those discussions. I would expect them to occur this spring and early summer, and we'll be circulating notice widely as to when and where those occur. I do think that there's opportunity, whether it be through funding or in-kind contributions, for us to explore ways to partner together on some priority projects. So at a local level or nationally, we can certainly explore that opportunity as well. And then I think that it would be useful for us to hear from you how to think more holistically about some of our investments, not just looking at a particular recreation site or recreation area, but how does an investment connect to broader objectives, whether it be resource management, whether it be rural economic development. And so not just looking at one site in isolation or even one forest or ranger district in isolation, but how that connects to some broader investments that are occurring on and off the national forests. I could go on at length about this. We're excited to have this influx of funds, and an opportunity is right before us to work together to build upon the funds that are being appropriated and tap into additional funding, whether it be from state or local governments, whether it be from foundations or from partners like yourself. So Warren, Marilee, let me just pause here, and in the interest of time, turn it back to you for any dialogue or discussion that might be appropriate.
Jeff, one of the questions that has come up, because a lot of our members work with their local chambers of commerces and a lot of rural areas, you know, hard hit by all of this, and they're interested in the LWCF part of the program. Can you talk a little bit about how the kinds of projects that can be done under LWCF and how communities can link into that process?
Sure. So I'll speak to the acquisitions on the National Forest first. A lot of our emphasis in recent years have been acquisitions that can improve recreation access. If, for example, we have a part of a national forest that has limited or no access because of its lack of an easement across private lands, for example, then we'll target investments that will improve that access. I would say we also emphasize acquisitions, which are always from willing sellers, that will further recreation opportunity, which may include acquisitions along a waterway to consolidate land ownership and avoid fragmented development. That acquisition may also improve access for boating or other water-related recreation. And we'll also focus on investments that improve our ability to manage our forests in a more intact way. As you all know, the fragmented land base and some of the private property that's developed within the national forest can sometimes complicate our ability to manage. It can sometimes increase the risk of fire and insect and disease infestation. And so we're also mindful that local communities often see value in us acquiring some of those parcels as well. In terms of getting involved in acquisitions, I think, Marilee, it's best to engage at the forest supervisor level, whether you have a particular parcel that you think is important to acquire, whether you know that there's attractive land that is available or may become available. Those are the kinds of conversations that can sometimes take years to lead to an actual acquisition. And I would emphasize too that many of our acquisitions are facilitated through third parties like the Trust for Public Land, the Nature Conservancy, and some more local conservancies. So if you don't already have relationships with local conservancies, then those are real important. The Forest Legacy Program, in contrast to LWCF within the National Forest, is really about working with states to acquire interest in land, principally conservation easements, so as to keep forest and rangeland in working condition, but to prevent those lands from being developed. It's been in existence since the early 1990s. It's enjoyed bipartisan support, and we've acquired through the Legacy Program lands and interest in land for working forest principally in almost every state in the country. So there again, I think if there's an interest among your membership to be more engaged in some of these acquisitions, I can certainly follow up with you and provide our program contact within the agency. That might be a good place to start in terms of how to get more dialed in on the Legacy Program.
Thanks. And are funds available to communities on non-Forest Service lands, like for bike trails or fishing piers or that sort of thing?
Great question. Through the National Park Service, there are LWCF funds that are targeted toward acquisitions of the nature that you described. So again, I'd be happy to share with you that point of contact, but it's primarily through the Park Service that those funds are distributed to local communities outside of federal land.
Great. Thank you very much. That would be super.
This is great. I'm sitting here looking at the questions here. Any chance Bureau of Reclamation recreation areas can be included in GAOA in the future? I don't know. I think that's probably an issue for Congress. I think Congress chose who it applied to and who it did not.
That's right. The 4 agencies within Interior that are receiving funds under GAOA are the Park Service, which receives 70%, and then BLM, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Indian Education, each are receiving 5% of GAOA funds, and then the Forest Service is a recipient of 15%. So as you note, Warren, if hopefully this act gets extended for an additional 5 years or permanently, then that would be the ideal time to add in Bureau of Reclamation. And then of course, in the meantime, you could certainly make the case to members of Congress as to why Bureau of Rec needs to be part of this equation.
I know y'all can't lobby, but I mean, I'm hoping that come 2 or 3 years from now, that there's a concerted effort to at least kind of in a glossy sort of way say, hey, here's, the kind of things the GAOA money brought you. I mean, I used to remember in certain funds of money, like when they do municipal work and they pass some law for roads here, like in the state, they'll put up a little sign, this was brought to you by Prop 602. I don't know if there's any things like that are being considered to help the public, because I think this is really very popular with the public, but I also think it's, the operation of it is virtually invisible to the public. And so I don't know how to bridge that gap.
Warren, that's a really great observation, and it opens up a lot of different possible conversations. One is, what's the story that we're telling about this act? How is it a success, and how can the public see the difference in this investment? And that's something we're focusing on through obviously a website that I forwarded to you and Marilee is one way. We're working up a short video that can tell a fairly succinct story about the act, and we're already planning to capture again on video some before and after stories of project investments that really stand out.
Yeah.
So you're right, while we can't lobby, we can certainly tell a story, and we can provide information to the public and to Congress that hopefully will capture wide support. And I think we need to look to partners like NFRA for ideas about how best to tell the story, and where you can say things and go places that we can't, then we can think creatively about how to tap into each other's strengths.
Good. I don't see any other questions. Do you have anything else, Marilee, or else I'll wrap it up? Marilee just muted herself, so I guess she must not have anything.
Which is, how could I be muted? That's impossible. So on one list, I saw there were like a new district ranger office and a new forest supervisor's office. And so we had some questions from some of our members that wasn't it intended for like to fix up stuff that was in crummy condition. Can you help provide some details on that?
So thanks for the question, Marilee. There's every emphasis on facilities that are public facing that benefit public use and enjoyment. And we were pretty deliberate about minimizing investments in facilities that are mainly for forest benefit. I'm not familiar with a project that funds a forest supervisor office. I'm not disputing what you shared, but I do know of a district office in Kentucky that has tremendous visitor use. People come in for permits, for information on local recreation opportunities, and it's one of the really only local visitor contact centers. The condition of the district office was in, or is in, such disrepair that it was considered to be a critical investment. So it does reduce our deferred maintenance backlog. It does have benefits to local communities and to the recreating public. So while it may just seem like a district office, it serves a number of purposes and is consistent with the act. That said, those sorts of investments are the exception. We are overwhelmingly focused on improving infrastructure that benefits visitor access and recreational experience. But I'd certainly be interested to talk further if there's a particular project that, or projects that stood out to you.
Great, thanks.
I think the strategic look at investment is great. One of the things that struck me, and this is really not on topic for GAO, but maybe more for tomorrow when we have a lot of the recreation staff there, but I know that you've been on that staff before. You know, I keep getting frustrated that I don't think our GT offset is spent strategically. I think there's a scramble every year to use it. But I mean, I sit and look at places where we're looking at possibly, you know, closing campgrounds because of infrastructure issues that aren't that expensive. But at the same time, you know, there's a lot of GT offset, and then we're scrambling at the end of the year buying, you know, picnic tables and fire rings and stuff. I think there's a lot of, part of it's education. I think a lot of district rangers are not, you know, we're blessed with some that really are very focused on it, and some don't even really understand that asset is there. So one of the things, you know, I want to, this just reminds me, when we talk about later in the week as we get other people up, is it just frustrates me, you know, we pay the money one way or the other. We just like to see it used well. And it frustrates me that it's not, you know, always I don't think it's even ignored. There's no reason. I mean, I know Forest Service line officers, and you've been one. It's all, I mean, there's never enough money for all the needs. And so to have, you know, they're not always huge, but there's forests where we pay almost $1 million a year. I mean, there's, you know, to have resource streams like that sort of, I don't think are well understood, is something I think we'll see if the recreation offices can partner with us on to make that known, because I hate to see that kind of not get used. But otherwise, this approach is great. I think it's fabulous that you're taking, and I don't think you mentioned it briefly, but I don't, just so the audience understands, I mean, he said he had 90 days, but I mean, you know, this was basically, I don't know that you even really had 90 days. I mean, I think it was like, you know, there's a little catch up because the Forest Service was really only brought into this fold at the last minute. So these guys had to scramble to come up with these first lists, and that it's as high quality as it is really a testament to a lot of fast work. So Jeff, we appreciate your work on that, and the whole team. I know it's a team of lots of people across the country, but we really all appreciate that, because both as visitors and as concessionaires, we're going to benefit from all that investment. So thank you for your work on that. And we would love to be involved, you know, kind of going forward in future years where we can do this, maybe where you'll have a little more time than you had the first round to be a participant in that. That would be great.
Thanks, Warren. So
thank you. So we're going to wrap it up for today, unless Marilee pops on and interrupts with me with some critical business. I'm going to tell you tomorrow, the schedule is still the same basic times. We're going to start at 9 Pacific, noon Eastern, and we're going to run for 3 hours. We have a very good agenda. We're shifting pieces around a little bit tomorrow in order, but that's okay. We got 3 basic pieces. We have folks from the Washington office who will be for the recreation staff at the WO, and we got a lot of the senior folks there who are going to be talking to us about the state of play and what's on their agenda and what's been going on. The second thing we're going to have is Kevin Garden is going to talk about NEPA and a bunch of rules. He's an attorney that's worked with Park Service and U.S. Forest Service concessionaires for decades, and is a critical part of NFRA and has contributed to our board a lot. And the third thing, and most important, is we're going to have our Ranger of the Year celebration tomorrow. That'll be probably the saddest thing that we can't actually have face to face and actually, physically hand somebody something and have them in front of everybody and all those kinds of things. And so, but we'll do our best to emulate that. I know that Region 5 has done a fabulous job participating with us, making everybody aware of the award and the awardee. And so we'll do that all tomorrow. So I hope you all will enjoy that, because it's always a highlight of the 3 or 4 day conference. Otherwise, I'm going to adjourn for the day.